Good afternoon, everybody. This session, we have 3 speakers, 2 from the very well-known and very well-published think tank Commonweal, whose policies have had major influence on Scottish government action. Now, these are not the highly paid consultants, but a small group of committed people who have the interests of the people and potential for a better Scotland at heart. The third speaker this afternoon will be Professor Richard Murphy. He's joining us online. He won't be here in person. So, well, he'll be appearing on the screen in front of us. Now, I've asked the speakers to speak for 20 minutes, give them a wave, and then 10 minutes for questions. So if they disobey my rules, you won't have time for questions. That's it. But I am going to give them a reminder for the time. So we're starting with Robin McAlpine, who probably needs no introduction for most of the people here. Robin is a well-known writer and commentator on issues, a lot of which have been raised by the speakers this morning: National Care Service, banking, economic growth, strategy, trade, and many other matters. So Robin is going to speak to us today, thoughts on strategy and policy.
Right, I'm going to do something I never do, which is I'm going to use a visual aid to kick this off. If it's working, ta-da. Right, this is the world's most depressing graph. So I want to talk you through this. I'm going to move away from the microphone, so whoever's live streaming, really sorry. Right, so I want to tell you what you're looking at here. This, do you want me to pull a microphone over? There's a microphone somewhere. Just grab this one, right? Ta-da. Right, so, the table here, let me tell you what you're looking at. Up and down is net wealth import, net wealth export. The higher up you go, the more money is coming into your country on an annual basis. The further down you go, the more is being exported out of your country. Left to right, poorest per capita, richest per capita. So this is wealth, and this is wealth retention. So that is, as you would imagine, the worst case, heavily indebted, poor countries. So they're obviously not generating a lot of GDP. They're exporting a lot of it because they're paying interest to the big companies. These are other combinations of poorer countries. These are the less developed countries. Now, if you work your way up, you get into the world average, is about up here. Now we're tipping into the green. So these are all wealth exporters. They're giving their money away to the rest of the world. The green is the wealth importers. These are the countries which are drawing wealth from the rest of the world into them. So these are basically all the Western economies. That's the Eurozone there. European Union is actually slightly ahead of the Eurozone. That's the US and North America, right? So that's where that is. Now let me show you the depressing bit. Where does Scotland sit? Where's Scotland sitting at? That's Scotland there. Right, that's Scotland there. There is 5, I should have said by the way, this is Craig's work, I'm just stealing Craig's work. 5 countries are clustered round about here, and they are all tax havens. The reason that they would be clustered around there is those tax havens would naturally have been over about here, but what they do by being tax havens is they're deliberately leaky, but that accelerates their growth, right? So that's their strategy. So we're not a tax haven. Why are we here? Very straightforward. We are basically the most overseas owned economy we can find anywhere. Right, so we're gone. Name me a major Scottish company owned in Scotland. Scottish Power. Scottish Power is Spanish. SSE, Scottish and Southern Electricity, has 2 parts, one of which is part owned in Scotland. We've got 2 whisky companies, Grants and Erdingtons. And what? We don't have a bank, we don't have energy. We don't have housing. Craig's going to tell you about that, so I won't touch the housing. We don't own our supermarkets. What do we own? Right, so now, I mean, these are not major players, one brewing company. I mean, when we're talking about the whiskey industry compared to Brewdog, I mean, it's the scale thing. Right. So, coming back over to my water and get away from that depressing stuff. What am I trying to tell you? Right, what I'm trying to tell you is, we are here discussing Scotland's currency post-independence. What does that tell you about Scotland's currency post-independence? Not quite, because if this was balance of trade, if that was a balance of trade graph, you would instantly see, without categorically show it to 1,000 economists, and thousands of them would say you need to devalue your currency. Too much is going out, not enough's coming in, you're not competitive. Except look where we are. We're wealthier than the Eurozone. That's not a balance of trade. That's a balance of ownership. We don't own our own economy. What happens after independence if that became the case? Well, let me give you the most ludicrous possible scenario that we do what the SNP's official policy is, which is sterlingisation. So we've got to go down, I mean, I'm being sarcastic, but I'm not. We've literally got to go down to London and fill up wheelbarrows full of sterling because we are not allowed to produce it. We don't have any sovereign currency. So we have to go down to Westminster, get wheelbarrows full of currency and bring it up. But every year, for every £100 of currency in our economy, we are losing £6. So we've got to replace those £6 to maintain liquidity in the economy. So we are having to borrow 6% of GDP just to stay solvent. That's the SNP's policy. Why am I telling you this? Because we are not serious. This is supposed to be strategic thoughts, and I'm going to come around to those. I'm not going to repeat my strategy again. I'm tired of talking about it for just now. These are strategic thoughts because we are not presenting ourselves strategically as serious because we're not asking the big questions and we're not engaging with them. Now, the Scottish Currency Group is, hats off, congratulations, the most valuable, most important piece of the independence movement at the moment is the Scottish Currency Group because it's doing things of value. But the Scottish Currency Group is looking at currency. And there's an awful lot more than that we need to look at if we're being serious. So we've got no ownership. Why? Okay, so let me tell you the story which I think captures this in a nutshell. Gresham House. Who has winced? You people don't know who Gresham House... There we go, wincing up the back. They know who Gresham House is. Gresham House is a no-name London consultancy. It's registered in London, it's based in London, its office is in London, its staff is in London. About 3 years ago, the Scottish National Investment Bank gave it a £50 million loan using your money. Scottish taxpayer money was given as a £50 million loan to a London-based consultancy. Why? That London-based consultancy is a consultancy which advises wealthy investors on how to buy Scottish land and exploit the tree planting to milk Scottish subsidies for overseas investors, right? This no-name consultancy 3 years ago had no presence in Scotland. Gresham House is now Scotland's second biggest landowner. Every penny generated from that land and all the public subsidies are being exported. It's all being exported. Right, so I'm going to try and get to grips with this in ways that you can picture. In the first 20 years of devolution, we willingly gave up an entire year's wealth. Out of the first 20 years, a total wealth from one of those years, we put it up in a little box, we put a bow on it, and we said, there you go. We sent it out. About half of it went to England, elsewhere in the UK, and about half of it went to elsewhere in the world. We are, and incidentally, there's a magic word for this. You've heard it, and you know it's a good thing, and it's called foreign direct investment. And you think foreign direct investment is nice people coming here and building big factories to create new jobs. It's not. It's buying our assets and ripping the piss out of us. That's what foreign direct investment is. Foreign direct investment can be great when they come here and build factories, right? But they're not here building factories. They're here putting up wind turbines that they built in China and then piping all the wealth out. The Scottish Government is talking about funding a pipeline so that foreign-owned corporations can take Scottish hydrogen straight out of Scotland without touching our territorial land, only our water territory, straight out and straight to Germany. So that a private company in Germany and a private relationship based in Scotland's assets with no payoff for Scotland whatsoever. What kind of strategy is this? What sense does that make? Now, I'm going to give another example of what I'm trying to get across here, which is we're not serious. We're not serious people, and we don't deserve to be taken seriously at the moment. I'll give you another example. What's happening in the world right now? Everything is upside down. Upside down. The situation, bond markets are becoming increasingly dangerous to domestic governments. Everywhere else in the Western world, there are now debates taking place in and around economics about the extent to which sovereign debt should be exposed to bond markets because they're not behaving seriously. What's the conversation about bond markets post-independence in Scotland like? Anyone heard any of it? Has any of you, just out of interest, has anyone read any of the Scottish Government's independence papers? Right. So did you find any mention of any of that in there? Did you find any mention of anything relevant to this? Right, because there isn't anything. It's a bunch of slogans. So here's what I am really trying to get across. This graph tells us two things at the same time. The first thing it tells us is that Scotland must get out of the UK as fast as it humanly can. That is a result of being regionalised. Scotland used to be a domestic economy. We had banks, we had big business, we had big exporters. We were a serious player. Right? That is us being regionalised. If we don't get out, we will be the West Midlands. In fact, West Midlands probably owns more of its own economy than we do, would be my guess. Bet you they've got a couple of big players. We are being regionalised, and if we don't get out, that is going to get worse and worse. But it tells us another thing. It tells us that we're not ready. Because what is our strategy for dealing with this? Now, let me give you I'd love to talk about this for hours. I mean, literally, I'd love to talk about this for hours. It's not a simple subject. There's so much to be said. I'm just going to give you some examples. Number one, if we don't want to be crucified, we must. This is not the lefty. This is not the socialist. This is the data statistics part of me. We must nationalise and take into public ownership our energy. We can't export our energy wealth. Just for a second, forget all the usual lefty stuff about how we're making it work for the nation. We've got to retain that wealth. If we don't retain that wealth, we're off our heads. Right? We've got to stop letting foreign corporations, but Craig's going to tell you this, we've got to stop letting foreign corporations develop all of our property. It's extracting all of the wealth. I would go further. I would be opening a debate right now. I would pass a law in this country that nobody can own more than 3 whiskey distilleries. Seriously, 3 whiskey distilleries. Whatever, pick a number. They're a craft distillery, which is fundamental to the culture, history of this country, and they're virtually entirely owned by the Japanese, the Americans, the French, and the English. Almost completely owned by them. We've got 2 major whiskey companies that aren't, and the rest of it's all foreign-owned. So I would be using the Scottish National Investment Bank to fund management buyouts right across the whiskey industry. Repatriate those businesses back into Scotland. But you see, then when you say that, you realise that the point of the big whiskey companies isn't so much making whiskey. It's not making whiskey. It's mainly making cheap vodka, but that's a whole other story. Whiskey distilleries in this country are primarily making cheap vodka, which then goes into it's sold onto the gin industry. Whiskey is just a loss leader. They run whiskey as a loss leader in the top, even though it's phenomenally profitable. But that's not what you're really buying with these companies. You're really buying distribution systems. Interbev, these companies, they're distributing whiskey. So if we're going to do that, we need to build a national whiskey export industry agency. We need to cooperatize the export and the market access of the whiskey industry. We need to diversify it anyway, because the US is an unreliable partner. In fact, it's not. It's a reliably bad partner now. The US has always been an unreliable partner. It's now a reliably bad partner. And I'm no fan of the Chinese Communist Party. But someone said to me the other day, how do you feel about it? I says, well, I can predict them. I know what they're going to do. And on the whole, they want to sell us things. And they want us to keep out their business. And I don't want to keep out their business entirely. I'm a human rights advocate. But you know where you are with China. Where are you with America? Trump sees some bloody advert and he starts a trade war with Canada one afternoon when in between inspecting his new ballroom. So these are big, big, massive questions. And I can't begin to tell you this. I'm giving up in Scottish politics for just now. The main strategic thing I want to get across here is the next 9 months is just a dead zone. This is not an independence election. It's got nothing to do with independence. The campaign's got nothing to do with independence. The SNP's been struggling to maximise turnout of its core vote. It's using a core vote strategy of saying the word independence as many times as possible to try and get the maximum of its core vote out to give it the largest possible grouping in the parliament. It will not achieve a majority. Sitting in 35%, it hasn't moved. It's 2 years since the SNP moved the polls in an upwards direction. So that's not what's happening. We just need to sit out these 9 months. When they're out the way, probably about June next year, you'll suddenly realise that first of all, we don't have a parliamentary majority, and second of all, we've now ruled out the parliament as a route for action. Thank God, we should have been doing that a long time ago. You've heard me say this many, many times. I'm not anti-politics. God, I spent my life on it. But it doesn't mean that politics does everything all the time. This next phase is not going to happen in Parliament. No one can actually come up with a piece of legislation that progresses things in the Parliament. So I'm not looking at that just now. I'm looking at the big questions. My days are spent on two things primarily. Reading commentary on geoeconomics and reading commentary on geopolitics and the underlying data. Now, I'd love to talk about the latter of those because I am one of the very few people who's actually quite optimistic at the moment. Forget what it says at the top level. Forget what it says at the top level. I'll give you two facts. Trump is the most historically unpopular president in recent American history, and young men under the age of 30 in America are getting constantly more and more liberal. You don't believe either of these things. They're both true. Stop looking at ripples on the surface, look underneath. But I'm not allowed to talk about this, even though it's my geek thing at the moment. I want to talk about the other thing, which is everybody everywhere is trying to redesign geoeconomics as we speak, as we go along. I would reckon that the chances of the dollar still being the global reserve currency in 20 years is probably slim. It certainly won't be the dominant one. It certainly won't be the only one. Everything is changing except for us. Everything is moving on except for us. Now, I was asked to talk about strategy. And so I want to roll back and talk about strategy for a second because I want to explain why I'm saying this. At this phase, at the moment, the real reason I'm saying this is because I'm really, really scared that we walk out the door of the UK into one of those white papers. Suicide. Suicide. We will be eviscerated. First thing that would happen is that basically we'd be fire sailing whatever's left. Right? We can't do it. We need a plan. Can't walk into a bar fight without knowing what you're going to do. The whole global economy is a bar fight just now. Either don't go or be ready, have a plan. Right? So that's really why I'm doing this. But the simple truth is, and I've been saying this for a decade now, we're losing the debate on, we're not losing, we're failing to make progress on the debate on independence because people don't think we're taking ourselves seriously. And we're not. We're not. We're still lobbing leaflets with pictures of wind turbines through the door and doing jazz hands. Right? The public wasn't saying, send us more pictures of wind turbines. The public were saying, we've got various questions that we would like to believe that you've answered and you haven't answered them. How should I have confidence in you? Now, again, I could do that again. I could talk you over it. I did it last year at this conference. I talked you through the research which demonstrated precisely why people aren't coming over to independence even though they want to believe. Now, I've got to say this again. The next 10% of people that we need to win to get to 60%, they want to believe that Scotland could be an independent country, but they need us to demonstrate it. They're not hostile to Scottish independence. They're not hostile at all. They just don't think we know what we're doing. right? Now, this is my overwhelming plea. We are about to go into a crash and a reality check. Even if the SNP got a majority at the next election, it's going to be the demise. That same week is going to be the week that the Labour Party defenestrates Starmer, right? Because he's the only constant in British politics at the moment is that Labour can always get worse. That's the only. I look at it with amazement, and I'm thinking, my God, you've lost all your core vote, and you've decided to pick a fight over small boats again. Right? Every time you do this, you lose more votes. But here's the thing that should alarm us. I was reading the National yesterday, and I was flipping just through the headlines. There was a headline that says SNP poll lead increases. And I remember thinking to myself, well, I don't personally think it's because of anything the Scottish Government's done, but for me as a political strategist, it would be almost impossible for them not to be increasing their lead, right? I mean, when your primary opposition's in free fall, you should... And I clicked the link. See that? Opened my computer. Clicked the link, read the article, and they hadn't moved us a bit. The lead had increased because Labour had fallen. To my amazement, they're still in 35%. And they have been for 18 months, and they haven't moved. They actually came down to 21% in the list, which made me go, what? Right? So we're not even absorbing the disillusionment. We're not even converting people. We are not working effectively. We are stuck in a devolutionary cycle. We are addressing our problems with a devolutionary mindset, and we are trying to break out of a concrete block room using a toothbrush, right? Now, this is where I've got to stop. So, and I get questions because I suspect there might be a couple. So, what I'm arguing is, when this crash comes soon, this time next year we will be in it. It is our time to finally get our heads together and reset. This stuff is not unfixable. I could give you another 5 examples, but we need a national industrial policy to recapture ownership of the Scottish economy in Scotland. Commonweal's got lots of work on this, and we're about to start out on some more, because this is the most important factor facing our economy just now. I keep saying, every time you wonder, why can't we afford public services? Because 6 out of every £100 that we generate in wealth is taken out of the country. Why do we have a general sense of decline and decay in our society? Because every £6 that we generate in wealth is taken out of the economy, like nowhere else on the entire planet. London gives us some of this back and then makes us say thanks. That's just really quite frustrating, right? So we're going to be in this stage in which we are going to find ourselves looking and thinking, actually, those paths, those parliamentary paths that we were told were going to be open are not. Now, there's better paths. We have to start taking them. We need a Scottish economy group like the Scottish Currency Group. They need to be taking these questions seriously. They need to be, it's not a single answer. It's not a single answer. It's a discussion and it's a debate. We need to work this out. So I am urging everybody, if you want to win independence, take the seriousness of the Scottish Currency Group and apply it to the other things that we also need to do. And it would be so much better if we created one entity that was going to do all this work and we could actually pay staff and actually get it done. That would make a difference for us getting to independence. I urge us, sometime soon, we're suddenly going to realise we need something to do. Let's make it that. Questions?
Any questions for Robin? Okay, we'll start here with William and then wait for the mic, please.
Hi, Robin. Thanks very much for that. It's actually worse than that because you're only looking at financial flows and not trade. So we calculated it was 8% of the foreign sector surplus when you include trade. So it's even worse than where we are. I agree with everything you've said. I met Gary Gillespie, the chief economist at Scottish Government, on Tuesday, and he said, believe it or not, something similar. He said, we need to all get together and come to the Scottish Government with some form of research agenda to say, these are the things that we're going to look at, that we want to look at. Mm-hmm. So, and he said he will share that within the Scottish Government when he do it. But he also said, what you said, next 9 months is a complete waste of time.
Sometimes just
So there is. I think that I certainly don't want to stand or sit here and say the Scottish government are great, but they're willing to listen to us if we do that.
Right. So Gary Gillespie's good. I have some faith in Gary Gillespie as the chief economist. So I think there are routes into that. One of the things I actually completely forgot to say is that I'm deliberately not talking about balance of trade because the statistics are so bad in Scotland. Export statistics are so bad that they're unreliable. So if you don't know, the entire data that we have on import-export, it's a voluntary survey that goes out to a couple of thousand businesses with about, what is it at? 12% return. It's a random selection of people who reply to these, and that's the whole data that we've got. One of the things that, on the seriousness side, one of the things I would immediately say is, we had a paper Craig did about 5 years ago on a Scottish statistics agency. We should unite and pull together. Scotland has got a bunch of agencies doing statistics. It should be one. Every local authority pulls in statistics. Every government agency pulls in statistics. We do not have a Scottish Office for National Statistics. We did a paper on this about 5-6 years ago, and we got it passed as SNP policy. It's official SNP policy, which, as usual, was then ignored by the Scottish Government. They've never done it. If we were going to be serious, and I can't, for the life of me, I can't understand what's the hostility to a Scottish statistics agency. Surely that's good for everybody. If someone said, what's the first thing you'd do? It's get the data. We don't have reliable data for planning our economy because we don't gather it, because we are a region and we behave like a region. We need to, if we were serious, we need to start behaving like a country. We need country-level statistics on economics. Otherwise, we can't steer policy. It's the first thing that I would do, set up a Scottish statistics agency. It's not a difficult thing to do. It just needs to get done.
I don't know if you remember, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, we sat in the basement of the Yes Bar and yelled at each other for about an hour about how we were going to deal with this, the Growth Commission. And this was before we successfully managed to at least overturn one tiny but crucial part of it. Thanks very much to Tim over there. But, nothing's changed. Nothing's changed in that time. Really, your opinion hasn't changed. My opinion hasn't changed. I agree with you about a huge number of things. You have been banging your head against a brick wall for 7 or 8 years, and you've achieved nothing in persuading the core 100 or so members of the SNP to listen to your expertise or the expertise of many of the other people in this room. So my question to you is, what can you and we do differently over the next few years to actually persuade these people to listen to us?
Okay, there's a couple of things in that, and I'm going to chuck one up in there and just let it be, which is I'm not a believer in parliamentary dominance. Don't think societies do well when they're entirely dominated by their parliament. I think the framing of it's wrong. I think it's not what they will let us do or whether they will listen. I think a large part of it is that we let them dominate, right? So a large part of it is that we all think we need permission from, who's going to be I don't know, who's going to be finance minister post-election? Neil Gray? We defer to Neil Gray as if it's a natural order of things. Now, I say this again, couldn't be less anti-politics than me. But politics is only part of a picture. We have allowed the focus to be wholly on parliamentary routes to decision mechanisms, right? That's all we've been doing. 10 years, round and round and round and round on parliamentary routes to decision-making methodologies, which is all fine and good, but they're not real, right? So we're not, I'll say it a million times over, the world doesn't repeat. Okay, so the fact that we got a referendum when we got a surprise majority at a time when we were low in the polls and they thought they could get rid of the whole issue by giving us a referendum, that's not going to be repeated now. The thing that will give us a referendum this time around is when it's the settled will of the Scottish people. If it's not the settled will, they won't give us a referendum. We have to get the support up first, and then we need to get the parliamentary action. I've said it again and again. I'll keep saying it until eventually everybody believes me, because you will all eventually believe me. You'll keep running around this hamster wheel. It might be another year, it could be another 10 years, it might be another 20 years when you're reading about me from the grave. It will still be true. Nobody ever becomes independent in 40 51%. Doesn't happen, right? So we're going to have to get there. So if you all believe that we can get a referendum first and then get the support up, then, well, I don't, but you better hurry up, because you've been telling me this now for a decade, and I don't believe you. I don't believe we're going to be given the opportunity. Here you go, Scotland. Have this nicely packaged opportunity to get your support up to 60%. Knock yourselves out. Have at it. Is that what we're going to send us up? Right? No, we've got to do it ourselves. What is going to happen at some point somewhere is that we're going to have to bring in... Look, there's a lot of grown-ups in this field. Scotland is a place with lots of intelligent people, and an awful lot of them support independence. But they're not going to engage with a process that's meaningless. We have to create meaningful engagement. We have to meet, we have to bring in, I don't want to say all the talents, because people say this. I mean specifically a whole bunch of people with genuine talent who we are putting in a position of trust to actually do things. Now, whether I'm currently utterly ambivalent about how this is going to happen. Ambivalent's not the word. I don't know the answer. So are we going to have 2011, 2017 or 2024 at this election? So it could be that the stars align and the SNP get a blockbuster result. That's one scenario. Another is, it's more like 2017, the SNP kind of chug along, comparatively low voter motivation, and they drop a third of their positions, or, you know, they come down underneath. Or something happens, I don't know, maybe Labour replaces with Andy Burnham and they come right up in the polls. Right, so one of these things is going to happen. To answer that question, we need to know. And this is not with pleasure or joy that I say this, okay? Because I'm not saying this with pleasure or joy. I've tried every other way to do it, but right now, I don't think a stronger SNP makes this better for us. I think, to answer your question, I think a stronger SNP just makes it easier for them to keep ignoring these discussions and these debates. I don't ever want to see a party who's achieving something that I want to achieve do badly. But just as I said, Blair won't change course if he gets a blockbuster election in 2005. I'm going to say the same thing here. People need to have motivations to change. If the SNP thinks it can suppress the independence movement and continually dominate devolved politics in Scotland forever and forever and forever, it will be very hard to achieve that. I want a collegiate, collectivist way out of this. I can't emphasize it more, but I can't tell you what that's going to look like until we see where all the cards land next June, roughly.
Unfortunately, we're now out of time for questions for Robin, but maybe he'll be around later if anybody wants to buy him a drink and have another chat. Thanks, Robin.